Alright folks, so Old Czar Matt's going to tell you a story about way back in the Wayback times, in the 90s, when protein shakes tasted like chalk and you could only digest 30 grams per meal and the rest would just be wasted. You couldn't absorb it. Well, back in those days, I just recently learned of this new diet craze called If It Fits Your Macros. Spoilers, it didn't work out so well for me. In this video, I'm going to explain some of the potential downsides to an IIFYM approach and why, after many years, I am more of a fan of the flexible dieting approach, and I believe, for a couple of reasons, which I'll explain in this video, why I think that is more sensible approach for most people. Alright, so back to the story. It's like 95, 96, I want to say late 95, because Midnight Marauders, the third Tribe Called Quest album, had just come out. Anyways, so I'm learning about If It Fits Your Macros, and I'm like, okay, proteins, carbs, fats, got it, know what those are. Alright, calculate my calories, got it. So I get my handy, I think then I was using Harris Benedict, the OG calorie calculator. And since back then we could only absorb 30, 40 grams per meal, means I need like 5-6 meals. So, how can I afford my protein requirement? Oh, too easy. Tuna. Starkist Chunk Light was like 70 cents a can, and look at these macros. You got 90 calories and 20 grams of protein, perfect. Two of those, 180 calories, 40 grams of protein. Eat that 4 times, that's 160 grams. 360 calories. All right, now all I got to do is figure out my fats and my carbs, and I'm good to go. Well, I can have anything as long as it fits my macros, right? So, Sour Bright Crawlers, yeah. Now you're laughing, but the magazine said If It Fits Your Macros, including candy. Okay, so let's figure this out. 7 worms is 90 calories and 22 grams of carbs. Oh, and a gram of protein, perfect. So if I have precisely 2 servings, 14 worms per meal, that's 180 calories, 44 carb, and 2 grams of protein. Boom. So I'm like, yo, I'm a genius. I got this figured out. I'm going to have 2 cans of tuna with each meal, so that's 10 cans of tuna. And then I'm going to have 10 servings, 2 with each meal of Sour Bright Crawlers. So that's 70 worms. I can tell you exactly what that looks like, folks. Neither Sour Bright Crawlers or tuna have any fats because I was like, I don't really need any of those, which was probably my first mistake there. Even now, I'm not a fan of very high amounts of fat, but you do still need some. So first of all, then if you add up the calories and the rest of the macros, you got 1,800 calories, so 900 from the tuna and 900 from the Sour Bright Crawlers. So calorie-wise, that put me in a slight deficit, so I'm like, all right, cool. And then I'm at 220 grams of carbs, entirely from the worms, because tuna has no carbs, or at least the Chunk Light tuna has no carbs. So yeah, so I'm looking at 5 meals of 360 calories, 44 carb, and 42 protein, amounting to precisely 2 cans of tuna and 14 worms a meal. Awesome, right? Well, not quite. So not unlike the Twinkie, McDonald's, or 7-Eleven low-calorie but highly palatable, highly processed food diets, I did lose weight. I was in a slight deficit. And I was training. I was doing cardio every day and lifting. You know, I had like an OG Flex Bro split. I was doing somebody's program, I think Nasser or Paul Dillett's program. I was always a big fan of Chris Cormier, except, you know, I always wanted to train like Chris Cormier. I mean, I don't know, he's just really freaking strong. I always thought that was cool, but then I learned how structure plays into leverages and how I have narrow clavicles and he had wide ones. He's built to be a bencher, and I definitely am not. So, anyways, so I ran that diet for weeks. I want to say I ran it for like 5 or 6 weeks, with the conceit that because I was in a deficit the entire time, I would get shredded. Well, not so much. And that leads me to the potential downsides of If It Fits Your Macros. Calories are calories. However, I was eating literally nothing except protein in the form of tuna, which is not bad. That's a good source of protein. But then the rest of my nutrition was coming from highly palatable, highly processed, sugary worms. Let me tell you something, folks. Going to sleep at night without hunger cravings was almost unbearable. I had to do some real difficult mental gymnastics to win those psychological battles as a 19-year-old. I'd have to do that now as a former warfighter, and I did them somehow for weeks at a time as a 19-year-old. Only because the desire to never be overweight again overrode the discomfort of the hunger pangs that I was getting because I kept feeding myself nothing but sugar and tuna. So that's first of all. Second of all, my performance in the gym was suffering. I would power through absurd amounts of training volume, but the last third of it was basically phoning it in to check the block of whatever was written down on the paper. Nasser said do 3 sets of 12 lateral raises, so that's what I'm doing. The other thing that I addressed in yesterday's video on how to lose the last 10 pounds of stubborn weight, because my blood sugar was a freaking roller coaster of a sine wave all day, when I got down to the high 160s, so I had lost, 12, 15 pounds, the anti-starvation mechanisms kicked in hard. I was lighter on the scale, but I looked sloppier. I'm 19, training for 3-4 hours a day, and I was skinny fat. Worse, skinny fat and feeling like I was starving half the time, unless it was those brief 4 or 5 moments in the day that I was eating my 2 cans of tuna and 14 worms. So all that to say, folks, to make a long story short, some key considerations with the if it fits your macros approach, using my absurd but actual historical example, you got to consider the impact it's going to have on your day-to-day energy levels and performance in school, in the gym, at work. And then presumably, if you're dieting to lose weight to look better, it is for sure going to negatively impact your appearance if you index all the way to eating whatever as long as it fits your macros, like I did with my sour bread crawlers. Now, this infographic here is technically not correct. The calories are equal, but what does or doesn't come along with those calories is definitely not. The takeaway from this is not to demonize if it fits your macros. That can work. Just remember, nutrition does matter. A more balanced approach, taking into account micronutrient needs to support your mood, health, and overall performance, will do you a lot better than purely hedonistic eating with only calories and macros in mind. And it's certainly a lot more sustainable. Oh, some of those late nights were brutal. So don't be like 19-year-old me and fall victim to diet dogma. Find a sustainable approach that works for you and stay in the fight. Thanks for watching.